Third part. Dad, what do I do? Meg thought back on her father, the same father who taught her all she needed to know about life on the seas. His lessons had to apply to more than just out on the water. Make sure you're safe. This was the first thing that flashed into her head. Once you know you're safe, then don't think about anything. Not hope, not despair. Forget everything. If you can't do that, you might as well give up. And then calm down. Next, she didn't know whether she was safe or not. However, she didn't seem to be in danger. With that assessment, Meg lay down on the grass. She had a good view of the moon. The wind swept by at a soothing pace. It smells nice, the girl thought. Somewhere, the breeze had brushed through flowers in bloom. Suddenly she felt at ease, and there was no point screaming or crying about it. If she wanted to live, she'd have to go it alone. I'm not giving up, Dad, she thought. But I'm gonna rest now. I'm tired. Meg closed her eyes. She quickly fell asleep. The girl opened her eyes. Fatigue still lay in the marrow of her bones, but she felt better than earlier. The moon glowed more intensely, and the darkness was deeper. A little over an hour, I guess, she said, referring to how long she'd been asleep. When you were out at sea, you had to read your environment to know how much time had passed. If you couldn't read the sky due to inclement weather, you had only your 5 senses to rely on. Meg had been going out fishing with the boys since she was little, and her father had drilled the importance of that internal clock into the girl. Okay, next. Her right hand naturally came to rest on her abdomen. She was terribly hungry, and thirsty as well. You have to get to where there are other people. That's the ticket. Her eyes grew sharp. The girl realized she might dine on the sorts of monstrous creatures she was likely to encounter in her travels. Toward that end, her determined face swept all around her. Meg went over to one tree and snapped off its lowest branch. Panting for breath, she grunted. Not exactly easy on an empty stomach. Drawing the knife tucked through her belt, she began to whittle the point at the end of the 3-foot branch. The blade was as sharp as always. It was a first-class knife purchased from an itinerant merchant out of the capital. Her father had always said, "Use only the best for the things your life depends on, even if it means you gotta sell your house to get 'em." For half an hour she worked out in the moonlight, easy to grip and easy to throw. When it came to the tools of her trade, Meg didn't cut any corners. In no time, she exclaimed, "Yes!" and pumped a fist at the moon as if in challenge, but she brought it back down again immediately. Clutching 3 handcrafted wooden harpoons, Meg slumped to the ground. Her stomach rumbled feebly. Oh hell, I'm so hungry. She was just thinking how pathetic she sounded when the grass in front of her swayed. It was a sign something was approaching. Already? She hadn't expected to put her harpoons to use so quickly. But no sooner had she hauled back with her right hand to hurl one than a figure stepped from the darkness. Meg. A voice called to her, and the girl jumped to her feet. "Toma? Is that you?" she cried out, surprise and joy churning in her heart. She lowered her harpoon. Somewhere in her mind, a voice told her to wait. Meg. The figure was now close enough that she could clearly make out his face. There was no mistaking him. It was Toma, Meg's boyfriend. The 19-year-old boy who swore he'd live his whole life in that village. Great. I'm so happy you're okay. Say, Toma, where's everybody else? They're safe, Toma replied in his usual, somewhat rapid tone. Some of them escaped, and they're with me. Does that include my family? No. Your folks didn't get away. Your mom was in such a state of shock she couldn't stand. Bass is taking care of her. Where are they? Inside one of the nobility's facilities. And just where is that? About the Northern Cape. I see. And the rest of your group? They're hiding nearby. Come with me. Okay, Meg replied, and she was just about to head over to her boyfriend when she suddenly halted. Furrowing her brow, she asked Toma, "Tell me, just how did you know I was out here?" For the briefest of moments, Toma had a scary look, but he soon broke into a grin. "Oh, that's right. Good question. See, I wasn't actually looking out for you. Old Capsh and Hadira were bellyaching about how hungry they were. I thought maybe I'd find some night hares or something." Hadira was the far-from-old Capsh third son. It was little wonder a 3-year-old would complain about an empty belly. "I see. Sorry." Meg made a move to throw her arms around Toma, but he pushed her back. "Let's save the hugging and kissing till I know for sure we're safe." "What? Are you mad at me?" "No. It's just with everyone else to worry about, I'm not really in the mood for that stuff." Meg recalled how the strapping young man was the very picture of consideration. With only thin planks between them and hell, fishermen had rough dispositions. They had to be hard, or they couldn't do the job. And while they recognized that Toma was as rough as any of them, the way he listened so attentively to the pearls of wisdom from an old minstrel who drifted into town, and his kindness in not only paying the man too generously for his services, but also giving him some medicine, because he was old, had touched Meg's heart. "I guess you're right," the girl conceded. "Lead the way." As they headed west through the woods, Meg told Toma all about what had happened up until that point. "I wonder why I was the only one who suddenly went from being in the tunnel to out here," she said. "The island's kind of funny. Sometimes you mean to go right and end up turning left. It's like space is all twisted around. Like you walk due north, but you wind up in the south." That bites. I wonder if Wesley and the bounty hunter are still in the tunnel. Or did they wind up somewhere else like me? Who knows? Toma replied, heaving a sigh. After about 30 minutes, they came to a rough, rocky place. There was a sound of waves nearby. The sea must have been right ahead of them. A number of figures appeared from behind the grotesquely shaped rocks. Each and every face was one Meg recognized. Mr. Kemp and Miss Hardy. They were all villagers she'd watched walk off across the foggy bay. "So, you're all okay?" "That's great." Perhaps they knew Meg's cry of joy came from the bottom of her heart, and because everyone in the group smiled in unison. Meg stopped in her tracks. She'd just caught a glimpse of something. The thought it might have been those made everyone's smiles vanish. "What's the matter?" Toma asked from behind her. Meg shook her head wildly. Gripping a harpoon, she said, "Toma, let's get out of here." What? Let's go. Say goodbye to everybody. But why? He asked, a stunned look in his eyes. It's nothing. Oh, I get it. Is it these? Miriam Hardy said with a smile, pointing to the corners of her lips. The pair of fangs didn't suit the lovely widow. Nor did they look good on Mr. Kemp, or on his family, who stepped out behind him. The moonlight seemed to focus solely on their fangs. They got all of you, didn't they? Meg said, tears spilling from her eyes. It happened before we even knew it, and we couldn't do anything to stop it. Meg. She heard Toma's voice say from behind her, and he sounded at a loss. His position became clear. As she turned around, Meg raised her wooden harpoon and let it fly. Toma stared in astonishment at the long stake that had gone clean through his back. His expression seemed to say he didn't understand what had happened. You always were pretty perverted, you know that? Meg said, making no motion to wipe at her streaming tears. Every time you saw me, you'd always kiss me, try to touch me. But now, you didn't try to lay a finger on me. I thought that was odd. And another thing, you said you were out hunting hares, but you didn't have any gear for the job. If I'd let you touch me, you'd have known what happened to me. My body is cold as ice. Staggering to and fro, Toma opened his mouth and spat out a stream of blood, revealing a pair of gory fangs. But it's not like we wanted to be like this. I'm sorry, Meg. Who was it? Who did this to you? A pale woman and an old man dressed like a servant. And they said we'd be test subjects. Test subjects? For what kind of experiments? I don't know. It's just the people who were here before, made human and noble. With a pop, Toma's head flew into the air. Eddying blood splattered at Meg's feet, and she backed away shrieking. Behind her, she heard a succession of pops. All the girl could do was watch as the heads of one villager after another shot into the air. Every last one of them fell back to earth, with a stream of blood trailing after it. A little head rolled to Meg's feet, its face looking up at her reproachfully. And the head of Kemp's son. He was only 6, as she recalled. What the hell? Who did that? Meg's body quaked. Whether it was from anger or grief, she didn't know. She felt terribly cold. The moonlight dimmed. It wasn't that a cloud had moved across it. Another shadow had fallen on Meg. What the girl saw was a man in black armor floating in midair with his back to the moon. The 4 cylinders around his body seemed part of some device that gave him the power to disregard gravity. As expected, our impromptu puppets didn't work out too well. We were more concerned about someone else, and had to leave this to the puppets. And that's where we went wrong. The man said, his voice falling from a height of about 10 feet. Lord Denai says the more test subjects the better, and I had intended to bring you back to the lab. But it seems such a bother. I shall dispose of you here. Within a helmet that seemed to be steel burned crimson eyes that made Meg's blood run cold. Something cold touched her neck. Squeezing tight, it pressed into her flesh. The girl thought, that's what made their heads fly off. Oddly enough, she was neither scared nor in pain. The moon alone was burned starkly into her retinas. Off in the distance, a voice rang out. She didn't realize it was a cry of surprise until after the world turned upside down. Meg fell to her knees on the rocky ground and stared at the pair of figures squaring off some 15 to 20 feet ahead of her. The armored knight came down a bit to just over 6 feet off the ground, where he gazed in amazement at a figure in black raiment standing on the rocks. When the island came back to life, the first thing we did was to send out the fog. That bit of white devilry renders all in the world blind and powerless, as it drains them of both life and will. However, now there was a wind from across the waves that could scatter it. The knight's right hand slowly but with overpowering awe took aim at the figure in black. It gasped, "From you." The figure didn't move. The collar of his black coat and the brim of his traveler's hat hid his profile from Meg's eyes, and the incredible eldritch aura blustering from the area surrounding the pair chilled Meg to the marrow of her bones. And yet, the girl's heart beat faster and faster, and her ears could hear the sound of her hot blood racing. Within it, a voice wept with uncontrollable joy. "It's him, the gorgeous man I saw back at the Cape. I'm Baron Gildy, the chief of security for this experimental island. I would have the name of the man who menaces our very fog." The reply was succinct. D. Chapter 3, End.